Good morning, friends. Welcome back to Silverhawk Farm. We are making granola today, and I am so excited for it because it is one of my favorite recipes ever. If anyone is new here, my name is Bree, and I raise chickens, goats, plants, and children on my 4-acre homestead here in Lawrence, Kansas, which is in the northeast part of Kansas. Today we are starting a new series that I have big plans for called Snacks from Scratch, and basically I'm just going to try and recreate some of my favorite grocery store snacks in from scratch form, hopefully with a little bit higher quality ingredients and ultimately hopefully much more delicious. So one thing that inspired me to get started on making my own snacks and kind of household goods from scratch is this cookbook right here. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about it and my story with it. So back before we moved to this farm, we were actually considering moving to Colorado and chose to remain in the Kansas area because the cost of living allowed us to buy a big old farm compared to a tiny townhouse that my children would have to share a room in. But when we were considering that, we actually went and stayed with friends in Colorado. We only had one kid at the time, so it was without our one child, our oldest. So while we were visiting our friends during our downtime, I actually got introduced to Justin Rhodes, which if you're not familiar with is probably the most prominent homesteading YouTuber in existence. He's a legend. But we sat and watched Justin Rhodes, and I read through this cookbook, which is basically just a really lovely cookbook. It's called Homemade Pantry, 101 Foods You Can Stop Buying and Start Making by, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Elena Chernila. I'm gonna go with Chernila. And basically it just has so many different recipes for different things that you could replace in your pantry, from basic breads to granola to things like this is a homemade Pop-Tart situation on the cover, which I have made, and it is delicious. And then it has also information on breads and crackers and things like that. So in this series, I'm not just gonna be cooking from this book, but I do wanna give respect to this book because she is definitely the person who got me cooking from scratch and not necessarily always buying my tasty snacks from the store. So one thing I love about this book is that it actually tells a story, and she gives a lot of information about how this particular recipe has served her family, how she uses it, how she came by the recipe, that sort of thing. And as I was reading through it before I made any of the recipes, I recognized this one was supposed to be important because it starts with fold down this page and basically gives you an explanation on why this is going to become one of the most important recipes in your life. And when I read that, I was like, okay, lady, I hate granola. Granola tastes like cardboard. I'm never going to like it, and there's nothing you can do to make me like it. But I tried making it because she also says that you can replace your children's cereal with this granola, that children will eat this like cereal. And I was like, okay, I will try anything because we are very cereal dependent, and I'm back to being a little cereal dependent. I have a very, very picky toddler. And then I made it, and the only thing that kept me from using it like cereal was that my whole family ate it in a day. And it's a big portion. It's a big portion of granola. It's one of my favorite snacks in the world now, but only if I make it using basically the skeleton of this recipe. The other thing I love about this recipe is that it's super flexible and you can change things out based on what you like or dislike. I'm barely following the recipe that's written in the book. I did make it exactly that way the first few times before I started branching out. But for example, it has you adding sunflower seeds. I don't have any. I love them, but I don't have any, so I'm not gonna put those in there. It has you putting in sesame seeds, which I'm gonna skip because it's kind of expensive to use 3/4 of a cup of sesame seeds. It has you adding almond extract, which I can't find, so I'm gonna skip it, and I'm gonna add some grated nutmeg instead. So there's a ton of flexibility when it comes to what you can put in this recipe, but the one thing you wanna kind of keep in mind is keeping the proportions similar. I'm going to keep a similar amount of these chopped nuts as would be included in the original recipe. So the original recipe calls for 10 cups of oats, and I actually did follow that because I do love the oatiness, and I have a lot of them. I did do a combination of quick oats and old-fashioned oats. The recipe calls for old-fashioned, so I need to keep an eye on it just to make sure that it's not overcooking. And then the nuts that I have in my household right now are already roasted and salted because that's how we prefer to snack on them. So I'm gonna skip the salt that comes in the recipe, and I'm just gonna go ahead and let the salt from this be the salt. It will be saltier than the recipe originally calls for, but that's fine by me because I love a salty granola. I also am gonna need to be a little bit more mindful of overcooking because I am using the quickie oats. I am using already roasted nuts. So there's a possibility that those nuts could burn, or these could become a little bit too overcooked before the 90 minutes of cooking that the recipe calls for. So we're just gonna be keeping an eye on it for today. I'm also gonna be adding a little bit of puffed millet because I've made granola with that before and it gives it kind of a Rice Krispie treats kind of texture, which I love. And then I'm also going to be adding some chia seeds because the internet keeps telling me they're healthy and I don't know what to eat them in. And I have a big old packet of them. Basically, I just went through my pantry and grabbed everything that was possible to put in granola. What are you doing? Hi, are you helping? No, you can't eat that, it's raw. I can't let you eat it, it's raw. It's not ready to eat yet. You can have one of these though. You want one of these? Cashew. You're gonna have a cashew break. So after you've bribed your toddler with cashews, you're gonna wanna preheat your oven to 250 degrees because this is something that cooks really low and slow to keep it nice and crispy in the oven because we like that crispy granola. We don't want any soggy granola, nobody needs that. This is somewhat optional. The recipe does call for the nuts to be chopped, or you can buy them pre-chopped if that's easier for you. So I have my combination of mostly almonds, because we love almonds, whatever walnuts I had in the middle of a bag that I was in the back of my baking cupboard, and then the rest with cashews, up to about 4 cups. You could probably do a little bit more or a little bit less. If you do too much more, you might want to increase the syrup mixture so that everything's getting nice and evenly coated. But I'm just gonna kind of pour some out here, basically make it so that I'm chopping stuff and then putting it directly in here. So I've got a second mixing bowl here, and I'm actually going to split the oats roughly in half so that we have enough room to mix. Much better. And then I'll just kind of, half of the nuts will go in one bowl, half in the other, and we'll split the difference. It'll be fine. It doesn't need to be a perfect, precise recipe. That's not what it's for. This recipe is for quick, easy, delicious. Okay, you know what? It's not quick. It's quick to prep, but it does bake for a while, and then they want you to cool it for like a bajillion years. All right, so I'm just doing a rough chop on this. You can be as precise as you want, but I like all of the different sizes of nuts. It makes me happy. And I think the thing I love so much about this recipe is it comes out at like a really kind of like sticky texture. We're gonna use some maple syrup and some oil. But the next day it gets like a different texture that's also really good. And then the next day it has a different texture, which is also really good. It's just like a really versatile recipe, I feel like. So now that I have chopped all of my nuts, making sure that each nut is chopped like at least once is kind of my policy for how I prefer it. You're gonna go ahead and mix this. You could use a bowl, but I find it easier to kind of mix it by hand because there's so many of the larger pieces that like to kind of gather at the bottom. So I just kind of mix it, pulling those up. And once that's done, we are gonna go ahead and make our delicious granola syrup thing. So I've got all sorts of measuring cups here. It's gonna have me mix 3/4 of a cup of oil, 1 cup of maple syrup, 1.5 tablespoons of vanilla extract, which I am actually making my vanilla extract right now, but the beans have only been in there for like a week, so it's still just vodka. And I'm not gonna put vodka in this, so I'm using vanilla paste that I picked up from the store. You can use vanilla paste and vanilla extract interchangeably. It says to add the spices in with the oats and the nuts, but I forgot to do that, and I'm kind of curious to see if I can mix it in with this syrupy bit to make it a better mixture. I don't know, I'm gonna try it. We'll see how it goes. I'll report back at the end of the video. So one thing I like to do when I'm working with anything that could be sticky, I like to use this spray thing that's got some oil in it to line the cup so that that maple syrup will all come out in here instead of sticking to the edges and being really annoying to clean. So I'm gonna go ahead and measure out 3/4 of a cup of oil. It's a lot of oil, but it's gonna spread over a lot of things, so it's fine. 3/4 of a cup of oil. I'm finishing off the last of the maple syrup, and this is real maple syrup. If you're using a like maple flavored syrup thing, that's totally valid. Maple syrup tends to be a little bit stronger in taste, like a little bit more flavorful than your maple flavored syrups. So you might want to use a little bit more to be able to get that good maple flavor in there. So we've got 1.5 tablespoons of vanilla extract or vanilla paste, 1.5 tablespoons of cinnamon. I'm gonna use my 1/8 cup measure and kind of eyeball it. My whole house is gonna smell amazing by the end of the day. It's gonna be incredible. And then let me tell you about my best friend, whole nutmeg. I watch a lot of cooking videos, like a lot of cooking videos, and one thing I've seen repeated over and over is people using fresh ground whole nutmeg and acting as though it's way different than the stuff that you would get in powder. And it's true. It's so good. It tastes so good. I add it to so many different things, both sweet and savory, but basically as a rule, in any recipe that I'm using cinnamon in, I'm gonna add nutmeg because I love those flavors together and I think it's so delicious. I'm using a microplane grater. You could use the smallest setting on whatever grater you have. You just wanna be careful to make sure you're not getting like big chunks of what is very hard nutmeg. And I'm just grating it in there until I feel like it's done. We added a lot of cinnamon. You don't want to add too much nutmeg because it can be a little bit overpowering though. I'd say that's about good, probably a little less than half. It smells like Christmas in here. I know it's September, but I'm not mad about it. And it also calls for almond extract, which I would recommend. It's delicious and it's really good in this recipe. And I know that I have a bottle somewhere, but I can't find it. So I can't buy it because I know I have it, but I can't find it, so I can't use it. So we're just skipping it today. It's fine. It's gonna turn out delicious no matter what. So I'm gonna get a big old spoon and get this mixed up. Now that we've got our coating with our oil and syrup and vanilla and joy and wonder and a little bit of salt if you're not using salted peanuts, and we have all of our nuts and our oats mixed together, we're ready to combine these. I am going to wait to add the puffed millet. It's kind of like Rice Krispie cereal. It's got a much more like poofy texture to it, and because of that, it's probably gonna get soggy a lot easier. So instead of adding that right now, I'm actually gonna add this towards the end of the baking time. Because I've split my granola into 2 different batches, I'm gonna use about half of this, or about 2 cups per batch. And because we're mixing oil and liquid, it's not going to stay mixed very well. So I'm going to stir it a little bit before I start pouring. I'm gonna start with a metal spoon and then move over to my spatula. Oh, see, this is not nearly enough. So I realized that it doesn't seem like there's enough of this syrup to cover this and really coat it the way that I want it to. So I'm probably gonna add about another 1/2 cup of this and a little less than 1/2 cup of the oil. Beautiful. That way I do not feel bad pouring a little extra in here. This is much better. I'm starting to see some clumps forming, showing that the syrup is doing its job and making it into more of a granola than a random bowl of things. And it's starting to take on a really lovely kind of tannish brown color. You can absolutely add dried fruit to this, by the way. You would do that at the very end though, after it's done baking. I think that in this particular mix, some dried apples would be really good. That would be fall vibes. I might be doing that here soon. And then we're gonna do the same thing with our second bowl, mixing really well and making sure that it seems like it's about the same consistency as the other one. Now that I've got everything really beautifully mixed and it's forming these really nice little clumps of like sugary, salty goodness, I'm just gonna spread this out on a pan. I'm using this sheet pan, any large sheet pan that you have, or really like even a bunch of cake pans would work just fine. Basically anything that you can spread a thin layer of granola on and put in the oven is gonna work great. So don't stress about what you're using too much. I would say if you're baking in glass, as a rule, it tends to take a little bit longer. Just for everything, not just for this recipe. So I'm just gonna kind of scoop this all onto my counter, apparently. and most of it in the pan in theory. And I'm just smushing this down with a spatula, making sure it's nice and even. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're gonna actually mix it a lot during the cooking process so that everything's getting nice and evenly cooked. Right on, so I'm going to get this and my other tray of prepared granola into the oven set for 250 degrees, and we're gonna check it every 30 minutes. The recipe calls for 90 minutes of cooking. I'm not sure if it's gonna need that long because we are using the different type of oatmeal. We're also using pre-roasted nuts. We're going off book today, so I'm just gonna keep an eye on it and make sure that it's not burning or starting to smell like it's burning. So our granola's been cooking for just over a half hour in the oven, and I've taken them out so that we can shuffle them around a little bit to make sure it's baking evenly, but also to mix it up to make sure that the granola that's on the bottom is getting as crispy as the granola that's on the top. So it is actually the next day now. By the time the bake had finished for what ended up being a little over 90 minutes, I think it was closer to 2 hours. And then I actually let it rest in the oven, like it said to, for a full 6 hours so we could get the maximum amount of crunchiness. But by the time that finished it up, it was late and I was sleepy. So while I was baking, I did take it out every 30 minutes to give it a good stir. And what I was looking for was a nice like caramel brown kind of color to be coming off of the oats and the nuts, and for it to all look really nice and baked. After that was finished, I didn't even take it out of the oven once. I left it in there for the full 6 hours so that it could get nice and crunchy. That slow cooling time will make it crunchy instead of kind of chewy. If you like a chewier granola, that's totally cool. Take it out of the oven right away once it's finished. So it turned out really well. My son already had some last night and I am having some for breakfast this morning. I poured myself a bowl like I would cereal with just a little bit of the granola, just a little bit of milk, exactly the way I like it, and I figured I'd try some for you and let you know what I think. It's really good. The sweetness of the maple syrup really balances kind of the slight bitterness that comes with almonds and any sort of nut like that. It's obviously like a really hearty meal. It is much more filling than cereal, so if you are using it to replace cereal, maybe start with a smaller portion and see if you actually want more, because this small bowl of cereal will definitely do it for me. Although I'm not much of a breakfast eater. Other considerations, I think that in this particular batch, I think that honey would have gone really well. I think next time I'm gonna end up adding maybe like a cup of honey to the maple syrup mixture, because I think that would add like a different type of sweetness that I wouldn't say this is missing. I think it would be better if it had it. But it's so good. The other thing I love about it is it actually like doesn't melt down in milk, you know, the way cereal does. It gets like too mushy, too fast. This really like holds its own in a bowl of milk. And even if you use a normal person's amount of milk, unlike me, I use like a tiny amount. I hope this recipe was helpful for you all. Let me know if you make it or you end up picking up the recipe book Homemade Pantry that I got it from. Let me know what some of your favorite snacks are or your favorite snacks to make from scratch, because I'm gonna be doing a lot of these videos and I would love to hear what you wanna see. But I'm gonna get going because I need to start coffee and feed my child some of this granola for breakfast. So I hope to see you really soon. And in the meantime, treat yourself to something delicious. Okay, bye. We're done recording the intro. We need to eat cashews.